Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today's video comes to us from a channel called The Believer, and it's all about trying to get inside the atheist brain.
Well, you'd better be sure. Because once you get inside my head, there's no turning back, baby.
In my experience, most atheists who are open about their atheism are freely willing to tell you what they think and why they think it. In fact, it seems to be one of the common criticisms that theists levy upon atheists, that they wish we would just shut up sometimes. I mean, we aren't exactly keeping our thoughts to ourselves. So it seems to me, if you want to know how and what an atheist thinks, all you need to do is ask us. But what would religious apologetics be doing if it wasn't assuming the thoughts and motivations of their interlocutors and then strawmanning them for all that they're worth? But let's not assume the worst of this video before we've heard them out, so let's get into it and see what they have to say.
Imagine for a second that as you're listening to me right now, for some reason you get really tired, you start to fall really sleepy, and you fall asleep eventually. Now, you wake up and suddenly you realize you're on a plane. And the plane is flying. Now suddenly you were in a conference hall, in a lecture room, and now suddenly you're on a plane. What's the first questions that are coming to your mind? How did I come here? Who put me here? Where am I going?
Okay, so they're going with an analogy as their argument for believing in God. You know, I've noticed that apologists really do love their analogies. They tend to make them all the time. And analogies can be a useful tool in argumentation. However, they may also be the most misused and often fallaciously structured type of argument of them all. Arguments from analogy only work if the things being compared are similar enough to be able to say what is true in one instance would be true in the other. In this case, the speaker's drawing an analogy between how we, humans as a species, came to exist on this planet, and this story of waking up on a plane and wondering how you came to be on that plane. This is a textbook example of a false analogy fallacy. Just because both situations bring up similar questions of how did I come here, who put me here, or where am I going, does not mean that the two situations are comparable. For starters, in the story of waking up on a plane, that person already existed before that moment in another location doing other tasks. Then there was a loss of awareness and they came to in the plane. So of course they would wonder about the series of events that led them from where they were previously to where they are now. This is not comparable to the question of human existence because we didn't exist somewhere else prior to our arrival on this planet. There was no series of events that led us from somewhere else to where we are now. A much better analogy for human existence would be to compare it to your parents getting pregnant and giving birth to you. It's a much better analogy because it's a much more comparable situation, with similar answers to the questions as well. How did I come here? Through the natural process of biological reproduction. That works as an answer both for the individual on the plane and the human species. Who put me here? Your biological predecessors. For the individual, that would be their parents. For the human species, that would be our evolutionary ancestors. And where am I going? Well, wherever you want to go. That applies to the individual and to the species as a whole. And that's another reason why this analogy to the person who wakes up on a plane is fallacious. In that story, the person doesn't know the answers to these questions. They have no idea how they got on the plane or the series of events or motivations for them to be put on the plane. But when it comes to the human species, we basically do know these answers. At least in the biological sense. We know how we got here. Evolution by natural selection. We know that where we are going is a question we need to answer for ourselves. And as far as who put us here, well, as atheists, we don't believe there was any intelligence or motivation behind our evolution. Theists disagree, obviously, but there at least exists the chance that humanity came about through purely natural processes. And if theists were honest, they would have to admit to at least that much. But there's no chance that a person came to be on a plane without there being some motivation for it. Either they were put on that plane by someone, or got on it themselves and lost their memory of doing so. But either way, it's not comparable to human existence on this planet.
But now imagine, as you're asking these questions, suddenly you look out the window and you see the most beautiful view. You see the most beautiful sunset. Over the Alps, the sun's setting, and you start to enjoy the view. And suddenly you notice the comfort of the chair that you're sitting in. And then suddenly the air steward brings a 5-star meal and puts it in front of you, and you start to enjoy the food on the plane. Now you may temporarily be distracted by these superficial pleasures that you're experiencing right now. But ask yourself the question, could you truly be happy not knowing who put you on the plane, where the plane is going, and why you're there in the first place?
So now the analogy has gone into the person on the plane being distracted by creature comforts and turning away from the important questions of how they came to be there. I guess the analogy is that atheists are too distracted by the pleasures of this world to think about the important questions of human existence. But I really don't think reality bears this out. If anything, it seems theists are the ones abandoning the search for answers to important questions in order to assert their preferred narrative. I mean, who are the people doing real research into how humans got here? Anthropologists, geneticists, evolutionary biologists, people who are cracking the human genome and figuring out exactly how we are related to the other species and where our common ancestry diverged. People who are discovering new fossils and using them to determine how creatures evolved throughout the millennia, how they migrated around the Earth, and where they moved to, having specific selection pressures that cause various speciation events that split them off from other species. And even those scientists who do have religious affiliations in their personal lives are doing this research and discovery from a decidedly secular perspective. Meanwhile, what are theists doing? Clinging to stories of miracles being performed centuries ago with no independent corroboration as incontrovertible fact, and assuaging their fear and uncertainty when it comes to the questions of human existence by telling themselves that they do know the answers. It was magic, done by an all-powerful creator who will take care of everything. So sit back, shut up, and just trust that it'll all be taken care of for you. Oh, and if anyone starts to try to figure out the real reasons behind human existence through things like science and reasoning, make sure you undermine them at every turn, insist that all of their research and findings are completely wrong, without even taking the time to assess and understand what their research and findings are, and then claim that they're the ones who are being blinded.
As human beings, we need to know the answers to these fundamental questions, and we ask these questions. Philosophers, thinkers throughout history have asked these questions about purpose and meaning. But without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without God, there are no answers. Without God, remember what we said, you are just an accident of blind, random physical processes. You are just an accident. There is no meaning. There's no meaning.
Without God, there are no answers? You're going to have to back that up. Why would there not be any answers without God? Because we seem to be finding all sorts of answers through secular methods of exploration and discovery. I mean, this is classic God of the gaps. Throughout history, theists have been insisting that God and his God magic is the only explanation for everything. And one by one, science has found explanations that do not require God or any kind of magic. Diseases are not caused by curses, demonic possession, or misalignment of the spirit, but by the germ theory of disease, viruses, bacteria, genetic defect, etc. Lightning isn't Zeus's thunderbolts hammered out by Hephaestus and thrown to frighten the mortals. It's a naturally occurring electrostatic discharge during which two electrically charged regions, either both in the atmosphere or with one on the ground, temporarily neutralize themselves, causing an electrical current to move between them. We found answers to any number of natural phenomena, and we've done it all without having to resort to God did it with magic. There are plenty of answers without God, and more being discovered every day. And as far as us being accidents without God, theists love to use this term, accident, to describe how atheists view humanity. And it's a bit of a loaded term, because, like most words, it's a word with multiple meanings and usages. Sure, accident can mean any event that happens unexpectedly without a deliberate plan or cause, which is how theists are generally using the term when talking about how atheists view human existence. But in more common parlance, the term accident generally means an undesirable or unfortunate happening that occurs unintentionally and usually resulting in harm, injury, damage, or loss, casualty, mishap. This is the way most people think of the word accident, as a negative, as a bad thing. And theists know this when they choose to use the word. It implies that atheists view their own existence and the existence of humanity in general as a bad thing that maybe should never have happened. So when someone who does believe in God, or someone who might be on the fence about it, hears that atheists think that we're all just a cosmic accident, they're going to have a negative reaction to that term. And that's exactly why theists use it.
Why should I wake up in the morning and brush my teeth and go to work if I'm just going to die? If that's my end, why should I do anything? Why? According to them, you're an accident, you die, and when you die, you become worm's meat. So what's the difference between having someone who saves millions of lives and someone who takes millions of lives?
This gets back to the common theistic notion that unless we exist forever, then nothing matters because everything is temporary. So what does it matter if you save lives or take lives? Even when I was a believer, I had a hard time wrapping my mind around this argument. The idea that just because we might not be eternal beings somehow means that what we do while we do live has no meaning never really made sense to me. Why does something only matter if it's infinite? I mean, theists usually don't believe plants have souls, yet you'd be hard-pressed to find any theist who doesn't find meaning or beauty in a field of flowers, say.
They're doomed. Yes.
But a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. It's a privilege to be among them.
Honestly, the natural tendency is to find that the shorter something exists, the more meaningful and valuable it is. Impermanence, scarcity of existence, greatly heightens the value of something, not diminishes it. If you live for 5 minutes, then every single second is precious beyond measure. If you live for eternity, then what value does even 1,000,000 years have? It's less than a drop of water in an ocean of time. Frankly, this idea makes the entirety of our lives so utterly meaningless compared to the eternity of the hereafter that if this life wasn't used to amass cosmic brownie points to earn your way into heaven, there'd be no reason for any theist to ever care about anything in this world.
Brother Noble here, and say on this side of the table you had a chocolate bunny, a chocolate rabbit, right? Now for some reason Mohsin, he got really agitated, he got really angry, and he has a condition that he has to express his anger in one way or the other, yeah? So the way he expresses his anger is he has to take a hammer and he has to smash something when he's angry. Now imagine you have Noble on this side and you have a chocolate bunny on this side. He has to release his anger on one of these two things. Who would say, and he's asking everyone here, who would say, take it out on Noble? Who would say, take it out on the chocolate bunny?
Wow, and I thought the plane analogy was bad. Alright, so in this instance, he's saying that if you're an atheist, you don't see any difference between a human being and a chocolate bunny. And by the way, does anyone else see it as a bit strange that a Muslim is using a traditional Easter symbol in his analogy? And this video came out in late March, so it's not like he wasn't aware that Easter was coming up. But anyway, so if atheists don't believe in God, then why not smash the person with a hammer instead of the chocolate bunny? This is a serious question? Does this person seriously think that atheists see no difference between a human and a piece of chocolate shaped like an animal? Of course there's a difference, and one does not need to believe in a God to recognize it.
According to them, there is no difference between Noggle and the chocolate bunny.
No, sir. Not at all. No atheist thinks that. And the very idea that we do is insulting. You don't have to believe in an all-powerful creator or an immortal soul giving us all eternal afterlife to assign differing levels of value to living creatures versus inanimate objects. Especially fellow human beings, which we have an evolutionarily imposed vested interest in valuing higher than not only inanimate objects, but other living creatures as well. Because our cooperative social structure is vital for our success as a species, and therefore our own self-interest. Once again, we do not assign value based on something's permanence. Nor do we assign value based on the idea of a divine being telling us to attribute higher levels of value. I mean, are you telling me that the only reason you value the life of other people is because your religion tells you that that's what God wants? Are you saying that if you didn't believe in God, you'd go around smashing people's heads in with a hammer? Well, let me say this. If your mind is so broken that without the stabilizing presence of religious belief, that you would take a hammer to the skulls of the people around you, maybe even your own family and loved ones, because you so lack the ability to value human life and can only do so because you believe a cosmic authority is telling you to do so, then I kind of want you to stay religious. If nothing else, for the safety of those around you. But for the rest of us, we don't need to be told that people matter by a book claiming to speak for an unseen sky daddy to convince us of that little nugget.
We live in a time where, from a physical, materialistic standpoint, we have all of the luxuries you can imagine. We live like kings, if we really think about it. Running water in our houses, food on tap, fridge freezers full of food. We don't have fridges, we have freezers too, so for the summer you have your ice cream and everything. You know, you have TVs, microwaves, you have cars, you have more than one car. All of these luxuries, especially in the West. But yet people are not happy. Something is missing.
Well, all that points out is that accumulation of wealth and property is not a surefire way to happiness. And that's not any kind of great revelation. There's a variety of aspects to life that one generally needs to fulfill in order to be happy. I mean, this is basically reiterating what we've learned about human psychology as it pertains to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Happiness will elude most people until all steps of the pyramid are met, with the lower ones being critical to attain before the next step can be attended to. Physiological needs being the most crucial and must be met before others can be sought out. Then safety needs are the next most important. Then we move on to belongingness and love needs, with needing various relationships and connections with others. Then we move into needing self-esteem boosting goals that make us feel comfortable with ourselves and our positions and achievements. And at the top, self-actualization. Where would the accumulation of stuff come into the pyramid? If it makes it onto the pyramid at all, it would be at the top, self-actualization. But only if your personal conception of self-actualization included the accumulation of wealth and property. Many people get by just fine without such acquisitions because they don't see such amassing of wealth to be self-actualizing in the first place. So even if living like a king is a matter of importance to someone, it's only ever going to be the last on the list of needs to be fulfilled. So of course people with lots of wealth or resources, but who have failing relationships or feelings of never having achieved their goal are going to be unhappy regardless of how many cars they have in their garage. Not being happy, even when someone is wealthy, is not a sign that they need God in their life. It may indeed be indicative of something missing in their life, but it doesn't have to be God. Contrary to what any theist or this video would have you believe, atheists are not typically less happy than their theist counterparts, and religion is certainly not a surefire path to happiness or life satisfaction.
And when it comes to atheism and naturalism, the reason their worldview is so flawed is because when you go right down to the foundations, what do they believe? Let's summarize it in a nutshell.
I can guarantee you are going to get this wrong. You know what is an atheist in a nutshell?
No, this is me in a nutshell. Help! I'm in a nutshell! How did I get into this nutshell? Look at the size of this bloody great big nutshell. What sort of shell has a nut like this? I mean, it's just crazy.
Because the correct answer to the question of what atheists believe would be nothing. There is no unifying belief of atheists. Atheism is not a worldview, as you just incorrectly asserted. And the only unifying position of all atheists is that we do not have an affirmative belief in any god or gods. That is it. So when you start off your statement with, what do atheists believe? Let's summarize it in a nutshell. If you're following that up with anything other than, they don't believe in God, then you are well and truly wrong.
What they are saying is that everything that exists in the universe, in the visible world, and everything that exists is a result of blind, random, dead, physical stuff. That's been molecules and atoms that have been whizzing around for millions and millions and millions of years, randomly colliding into each other. They don't have a mind, they're not conscious, they don't have a power behind them. It's just random physical stuff colliding into each other over millions and millions of years, which have resulted in everything we see in existence today. Can you guys see the absurdity there?
So, argument from personal incredulity. That's always a winning strategy. Look, for starters, that is not an atheist position. It may be the position of a naturalist, but those two things are not synonymous. Not all atheists are naturalists. But as far as the naturalistic notion of an entirely natural universe, and everything in the universe happening without being set into motion by an intelligent or metaphysical will, your claim that such a notion is absurd is not an argument. It truly does not matter to anyone other than yourself what you can or cannot wrap your mind around.
But you can't make sense of these things on their worldview. According to them, we are simply an accident. We are simply a physical accident, and that's it. Now, they don't like talking about this because when you go to their foundations, this opens up a whole can of worms for them. Now you run into the problem of how do you explain things if you start with that type of worldview, if you start with those foundations?
Oh, we are fine with talking about this. We talk about this all the time. Evolutionary psychology is one of the main things that we talk about at length. How we humans come to think and rationalize the way that we do through purely natural means from an evolutionary perspective. I mean, this is a fully realized and active field of study. And, among other things, it explains how we developed our ability to think and rationalize our way through our lives and understand the world around us. I mean, is this just an extension of the contingency argument that you're making? Are you asserting that without an all-powerful being upon which all things are contingent, including the laws of logic and human rationality, then logic and human rationality would be impossible? Is that what you're driving at here? Because there is a simple answer to that notion, that things can exist without there being an all-powerful being upon which they're contingent. Our ability to rationalize and to use logic are simply emergent properties of our brains, something that we've developed naturally through our evolution. There need not be any higher power for us to do what our brains have evolved to do.
How can you deny Allah? Just think about Allah saying, how can you deny Allah when you were lifeless, you were dead, and He gave you life?
I was dead and He gave me life. Something that doesn't exist is not dead and then given life. Something can only be dead as a state of being that proceeds from being alive. Something that has never been alive cannot be dead. This is the same problem I had with the movie God's Not Dead, where Hercules insists that God is dead and challenges his Christian students to a series of debates about the existence of God. He even makes his students sign a form attesting to the idea that God is dead.
All that I require from each of you is that you fill in the papers I've just given you with 3 little words: God is dead.
I can't do what you want. I'm a Christian.
No, don't worry. You can still go back to your dorm room and sink to your knees and pray at your bedside if you'd like. If you cannot bring yourself to admit that God is dead, you will need to defend the antithesis, that God is not dead.
If I'd been a student in his class, I would have refused to sign such a form as well. But I would have done so from an atheistic standpoint. And if I'd been forced to defend the antithesis, that God is not dead, it would have been a rather simple prospect. I would have simply pointed out that dead is an adjective that is defined as no longer alive. And as an atheist, I don't believe God exists or ever existed. So since he was never alive, he cannot possibly be dead. Boom, mic drop, debate over. Screw you, Hercules. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. Basically, your terminology is all over the place and seems intentionally constructed to elicit certain emotional responses from your audience. Atheists think that we're all an accident to elicit a negative response to such an idea. Naturalism is ridiculous, even though you just describe naturalism and assign it the term ridiculous without explaining why. Now, I was dead before ever even being alive, because of course people will have a negative reaction to the term dead. We have a universal instinctive response to the idea of death as a negative thing, an undesirable state. So by insisting that the state of non-existence we had prior to our birth is akin to death, is to make it seem a wholly negative thing. These rhetorical strategies, these deliberate attempts to manipulate the emotional state of your listeners, is not going unnoticed. And it's not a particularly honest or forthright strategy either.
Stop it. Get some help.
Just think about this. If you adopt atheism or naturalism, what does this mean when it comes to purpose in life? Where is the purpose?
The purpose is whatever we choose for ourselves. Where the notion of purpose in life is concerned, all the lack of God means is that there is no imposed purpose assigned to us by a higher being. And really, what is the problem with that? Why are you unable to find purpose in your life without it being conferred upon you by someone, something else? I mean, when you're moving into adulthood and trying to figure out what you wanted to do with your life, did you specifically and unquestioningly do what your parents wanted you to do? Would you have been comfortable with taking a vocation that was chosen for you by your nation's government? Would you have been cool with marrying someone who was assigned to you and resolved to have the specific number of children that you were tasked to have, and live in accommodations where you were told to dwell, absent of your involvement in such decisions? I would scarcely think so. Why is it you and most everyone else demands autonomy in all other aspects of their life and decision-making, but you can't fathom the idea of one choosing one's own purpose in life without it being imposed by a metaphysical being? So, to summarize the entire video, we already know how we got here. We aren't accidents so much as the result of natural processes. Atheists can assign value to human life without God. Your incredulity about that matters only to yourself. We weren't dead before we were alive, and we can perfectly well choose our own purpose for ourselves. And if this video is any indication about what you actually believe about how atheists think, then you have light years to go before you even come close to understanding us. And that is a sad state of affairs, because to reiterate what I said in the opening, we atheists are quite willing to tell you what we think. It just requires two things. One, that you actually ask us what we think, instead of just making wild straw man assumptions about it. And two, that you actually listen to what we say, rather than reading your own theistic interpretations into what we say in order to further straw man us. Basically, you just don't get us at all. So that's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.